Happy Christmas.
It's coming, and that's mandatory recurring financial and non-financial sustainability reporting for companies around the world, and it's imminent. This will be all new territory for most corporate C-suites and boards, and on the front line for this task will be the company's reporting officers. Many are not prepared. They don't know how to compile the reports and what information should be included. The ESG Exchange has got deep global expertise on both the process and the content. And our state-of-the-art how-to guide for sustainability reporting has been built by our global network of leading sustainability standard setters and regulators. We assist corporate leaders in the field of sustainability across diverse professions, industry sectors, and geographies globally. The ESG Exchange's collaborative approach is working hand in hand with company officials, facilitating their sustainability reporting. It makes it straightforward, it makes it less burdensome, it reduces the time needed to complete the process too. The ESG Exchange's unique 5-module playbook provides clear and concise how-tos on a whole range of subjects, including data and technology, operational processes, business analytics, auditable report production, and repeatability and refinement. It removes the guesswork. Subscribers to ESG Exchange's implementation and training program have secure portal access to multimedia learning content, and our discussion forums are available to all subscribers, as are demand-driven support resources. Subscribers capitalize on our extensive global practitioner experience to demystify financial and non-financial sustainability reporting. The ESG Exchange is an initiative of the Good Governance Academy, and its patron is none other than Professor Mervyn King.
Well, hello everybody. That voice was mine. My name is Bruce Whitfield, and welcome to part 2 of the launch today of the plan to create global standards for ESG. We went east this morning. We had lots of participants from Asia, from Australia. We had participants from parts of Africa. And as we head into the afternoon in the sort of, I suppose, the Western Hemisphere, we've got participants today with us from the United Kingdom, from Europe. We've also got Mervyn King in South Africa, along with Carolyn Chambers as well. So you are very welcome, and it's lovely to have you with us as we try to set a global standard for ESG reporting. There's plenty of criticism of ESG, there's plenty of thumb-sucking and guesswork in ESG, and that's not going to do anybody any good whatsoever. And a huge amount of work has gone in over recent years to extend ESG into a proper discipline. You're going to find out today just exactly how that is playing out and the huge amounts of money that are being invested to ensure that corporations can be trained up so that we get a global baseline and we then get a new way of measuring ESG into the future. I went to the World Economic Forum in Davos just a couple of weeks ago. It feels like a lifetime ago. Summer in Switzerland was lovely, but there was also just this palpable sense of fear as we move from an era of abundance into an era of scarcity, and you hope that that doesn't derail plans for ESG. Certainly, we hope that the benefits of ESG are understood and are seen and are witnessed so that we can roll out a global standard. If you'd like to chat to each other and welcome each other and all of the usual things that nice people do when they come to webinars, you can use the chat function. If you want to do the serious stuff and ask some questions, why don't you use the Q&A button? Try and limit your answers to old-style Twitter of 120 characters or less. That way, I get to be able to compute them well enough to be able to put your question to any one of our panelists today. And if you could direct your question, that would be even more helpful so that I can get your question answered to the very best of our ability this afternoon. On your panel today, Professor Mervyn King. He's a global leader in corporate governance circles. He's been instrumental in this process of creating ESG standards worldwide. I'm sitting just off Pall Mall in London at the Army and Navy Club, diagonally across the road over there from St. James's Palace, which Mervyn King will tell you about in just a moment, because it's part of the critical journey towards ESG. We've also got Harry Boardman, the chair of the ESG Exchange Governing Council. He's a global economist, a presidential advisor. Helle Bank Jorgensen, who is the chair of the ESG Exchange Advisory Committee. She's a US-based, Danish-born head of PwC for sustainability, which is very important. We've got Peter Duffy, who is chair of the Technical Committee, and in Johannesburg, Carolyn Chambers, the CEO of the Good Governance Academy. Welcome to them, welcome to you, and I think we'll kick off with you, Mervyn King, if we may, just to give us an introduction into the world of ESG as to where we've come from and where we are right now.
Well, thank you very much. In regard to St. James's Palace, Bruce, I was chairman of the Global Reporting Initiative, which was called an initiative because it was at that time, on sustainability reporting, 1997. And Prince Charles's Trust, A4S, Accounting for Sustainability, and the GRI got together and agreed with IFAC, the International Federation of Accountants, that because only 20% of the makeup of the market cap of companies on the great stock exchanges of the world was being reflected in balance sheets, in financial statements, and the 80% wasn't being represented. And it was being reported with guidelines, because there were no standards, that it was necessary to arrive at the true value of a company, to connect these two, the financial information and the non-financial information, and integrate them, because integrate is different from connecting. Connecting is to link, and integrate is a system. And that was a discussion between the executive of A4S, Sir Michael Peat was then the chair of Peat Marwick fame, and I, and the language was agreed to integrate it. And His Royal Highness gracefully agreed we could launch it at St. James's Palace. And we, the executive of the A4S, and I and my colleagues at the GRI made up the invitation list. So let's assume you were invited, Bruce, you would have received a gold embossed invitation from His Royal Highness Prince Charles. And we
I'm waiting. I'm apparently going to be delivered across the road very shortly.
And at the time, we sent, for example, invitations to executives of FASB and executives of the IASB, two contesting parties in regard to financial reporting. And not one person said no to that invitation, because everybody wanted to keep that invitation in their scrapbook, you see. And everybody turned up. And that it was unanimously agreed that we needed to integrate this information, financial and non-financial. And as you indicated in your introduction, Bruce, it was one of those steps towards where we are today. And the Good Governance Academy, which I formed about 3 years ago, was because I realized in my travels around the world as an expert on corporate governance and corporate reporting, that the teaching and the learning of people coming out of business schools and universities was not the same all over the world. Some were better than others. And I thought there was a need to marry SDG 4, which is quality education, with SDG 17, which is collaboration. And I used my network to connect those two, and I appointed Carolyn as the chief executive. Very wise choice, very good choice as the chief executive. And today we have only 2.5 years later, I think it is, Carolyn, we have our summaries of our colloquia go to 5 million accountants and directors in 135 countries. So we're spreading the message of this comprehensive corporate reporting system. So what is the ESG Exchange about? Well, it's about sustainability reporting. And sustainability reporting really covers the ESG factors: environmental, social, and governance. When we started sustainability reporting, it was really connected mostly to environmental issues and climate change. But now it's social issues such as the pandemic and governance issues. If the board makes a business judgment call, which is completely erroneous, for example. So what has happened is that world bodies such as the IFRS, International Financial Reporting Standards Board, has realized that as we've moved from profit, Milton Friedman's idea of profit, increased share price, increased dividends, tick, 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 the company is successful. Even though the majority of those companies during the late 20th century into the 21st century, that increase in bottom line profit was being subsidized by society and the environment. So it really wasn't adding value to society. So the what is about sustainability reporting, and who has to attend to that is management. And at the moment, management is trying to wrap their heads around all the different changes that is happening in sustainability reporting or ESG reporting. We have the IFRS, who decided that not only International Financial Reporting Standards Board, but of course they were under the monitoring of the IOSCO, International Securities Organization. They should also have an International Sustainability Standards Board. And they should issue their standards looking at the outside-in influences. I illustrate that by the collapse of Lehman Brothers. When Lehman Brothers collapsed, it impacted on the financial condition of companies, their balance sheets, it impacted on their operating performance, their income statements, their cash flows, and it impacted on their risk profile, their cost of capital. When we started the GRI way back at the beginning of the 21st century, we looked at how the company made its product and how, in making its product, was it impacting on the three critical dimensions for sustainable development enunciated by Brundtland in 1987, namely the economy, society, and the environment, or as she put it, people, planet, and prosperity. And suddenly we, in the thought leaders in this reporting space, realized that there were two sides to the sustainability coin: inside out, how the company makes its product, and its product itself impacts on those three critical dimensions. And yet these three critical dimensions, such as floods in a country, environmental issues, impact on the value of a company. So we had the Sustainability Accountancy Standards Board established 10 years ago, focusing on outside-in factors, enterprise value creation. The GRI to this day focuses on inside-out, the impacts of how the company makes its product and its product going out into society. The great example is Coca-Cola. 120 years of being the most valuable brand in the world. And a ladies' organization in the United States started alleging that the reason for the obesity of children in the United States was Coca-Cola. Well, that allegation has never been proven, but Coca-Cola reacted to it, changed their marketing, developed Coca-Cola Zero, which had no sugar in it, etc., etc. So that society has become critical today in the valuation of companies, because we, as directors, have moved from this ticking the box to show that share price has increased, the dividend has increased, and therefore we are a success. And looking at increasing the value of shareholders, the shares in the company, and focusing on the interests of shareholders, who is just one stakeholder in the architecture of the limited liability company. So management today has to focus now on sustainability reporting, because it makes up 80% of the makeup of the market cap of companies. But there are different standards of sustainability reporting. They're the standards that will come out of the ISSB under the IFRS. There is the standards in the European Union that have come out, the European Sustainability Reporting Standards, driven by their legal constraints, such as no more combustion engine motor cars by a certain date, no more fossil fuel-driven plant and machinery by a certain date. So their standards are both inside out and outside in, and not a focus on just one part of it. So as executives, you've got to wrap your mind around all this. And the regulators in Kenya, Uganda, Australia, South Africa will decide what is the best for that country. So it's novel what has happened. Huge changes in the last 6 months. And the exchange we realized at the GGA, at the Good Governance Academy, that we had to try and have a source where executives could get the content of these standards and understand these standards depending on what the regulator said they should follow. But they are standards and they have to comply with them. So greenwashing will be diluted. So greenwashing will go out of the window, as a matter of fact, because you have to comply with the standard. And how to report. We draw financial statements today, hundreds of years of how to draw these financial statements. And it's got resilience, it's got reputation, it's fixed, and people can rely on it. The same thing has got to happen with sustainability reports. But there's got to be a source which can help the management mine the information in their companies, which is needed to meet the standard of sustainability reporting, which their regulators will decide for that jurisdiction. And the purpose of the ESG Exchange is to be a font of knowledge of standards of sustainability reporting and how to do sustainability reporting. And we have already started developing modules on this, and we hope to launch a playbook, to use a word that's favorite these days, a playbook, on how to do these sustainability reports. And that's what the ESG Exchange is all about, which we launched today. Thank you, Bruce.
Mervyn King, thank you very much indeed. And I see there are 133 of us on the call this evening. So thank you to everybody who has joined us, particularly, if I may say, Baba in Australia. You were meant to be on the morning session. I'm not judging. I'm grateful that you've come. But you are up very late this evening. There's somebody from Malaysia tonight. We've got people from Istanbul, from Kigali, from Namibia, from Dublin, from Boston, and even from Chichester. You've got to be careful how you say that. Right, let's go around the table. Harry Broadman, I think you are in the United States. It looks like a sunny day in the United States. I'd like your perspective, please, as to where we are, from your perspective, on ESG.
Well, I think we're at the beginning of a new era of the importance of rigorous reporting subject to standards that have been, as Mervyn said, the way of the land and lands for many years in financial side, but not on the non-financial or the sustainability or ESG side. And what we're finding is that there's a niche to provide independent, commercially oriented help, the how-to, the playbook that Mervyn mentioned. And that's the purpose of the ESG Exchange. And the word exchange was chosen deliberately to name the organization because we see the reporting not just as a requirement, but as a business transformation tool, because companies do need to transform themselves. Why? Because it's good for their share price, their value, and the capital markets will value them differently depending on how well they do the reporting and how rigorous that reporting is. So we're trying to bridge the gap that is already large and likely will be larger if the mandatory reporting requirements vary by different jurisdictional standards. And we're trying to close that gap.
Thank you very much, Harry Broadman in the United States. Peter Duffy, you're next on my screen. I'm not sure where you are, but we can guess. Your perspective on ESG?
Thank you, Bruce. I'm speaking from the centre of the known universe, Ireland, of course, and I'm chairing the technical committee. And I guess in terms of our contribution to sustainability, to all things ESG, which of course is a subset of sustainability, something interesting happens when you look at the big and basic fundamental things that organizations need to do, like gathering the data, and the data is disparate. It's different taxonomies, different methods of units of measure, different approaches, different methodologies, and so forth. All of this non-financial data has brought together in a coherent and relevant way. And you then need to project where you're going to be in the context of your different business objectives and how they impact on the E, the S, and the G. But when you look at the big and basic fundamental things that organizations need to do, and you look at them through the lenses of, for example, the board, its governance mandate, the thinking part, the brain of the organization, the consciousness of the organization. When you look at them through the perspective of the CEO, the chief financial officer, or thanks to Mervyn King, a term or a title that's been changed just now or gradually over the next number of years, the chief value officer. When you look at it through the lens of middle management and so forth, what do you find? You find the intersection of multiple, arguably a couple of hundred critical things that need to be done across organizations. Harry made reference to business transformation, I think. Standards are relatively easy to write, but operationalizing those standards throughout organizational mechanisms and programs of change and so forth is extraordinarily difficult. And our job in the ESG Exchange, being agnostic of all standards and frameworks, is to produce this business-friendly method of generating how-to playbooks that can be applied from the boardroom through to the operational front lines, such that the metrics that are required to be gathered, the changes that are required to be made, can be done in a coherent and a coordinated way. Because unless you do that, unless you find a way of operationalizing all of that information and affecting change, you don't get the needle to move, the sustainability needle to move. And ultimately, investors being one, and arguably one of the most important group of stakeholders, investors need to know that what your story is looking forward and how viable you are going to be over the longer term. The pension funds in particular absolutely need to know that you're viable over the longer term. That's their fiduciary duty that they have to fulfill. They need that information. Our job is to help people to produce that information, telling the story of the organization, demonstrating its viability and its capability to perform over the longer term.
Thank you very much indeed. Hellebank Jorgensen, also in the United States, I believe. Your perspective, please.
Thanks so much, Bruce. And yes, I am actually in New York right now. I'm at the Greenfin conference where we're talking about all of these things. But before I go to what it is that every of these investors, asset managers, etc., is asking for right now, just want to make sure you said that I was PwC. I had 19 fantastic years with PwC.
19?
Partner,
You're staying power.
but I now train board of directors and business executives in terms of ESG and climate to be competent boards. So just want to put that in place. And so in terms of what we're seeing right now, so I have actually here at the conference all of these standard setters. I have many of these asset managers, investors, primarily the larger US, but clearly investing globally. And they are asking for comparability. They are asking for making sure that we not only can compare, but that we're taking out the guesswork of all of this. I already dated myself a bit, so let me date myself a little bit more. 30 years ago, I did the first green account in the world and later the first integrated report in the world. So there's a lot that have happened over years. But what happened the last couple of years? So much, because we're starting from the voluntary reporting to actually getting it into regulations, to actually seeing, ISSB, all of the acronyms that we have, let's put them aside. But companies are looking at this and saying, how should I deal with this? Should I hire a lot of people? Should I use a lot of time? I think what we're doing with the ESG Exchange is to take away some of those costs, but also a lot of that time, and actually making sure that the disclosure will be comparable and will be usable for all of these stakeholders, including the investors and others asking. So if you ask me if this is right time, right place, perhaps a little bit too late, but that's how it is. And in the middle of the night when we had the first FDs, I said, we need to make sure that we go far. And there is this thing: if you're going to go far, you want to go together. But we both want to also make sure that we both go far and do that together, but also that we do it fast. And I think that's what we really aiming at here, collaborating with all of these different standard setters and stakeholders.
Well, thank you very much indeed. And yes, fast and sure and true, absolutely pivotal, of course. Carolyn Chalmers, let's go to you. And let's find, you are the chief executive. This is your job to make sure that it all happens, and that the ESG standards are set and everybody does their job and does their bit. Give us your perspective, please, as I suppose the coordinator, the ringmaster, the person who is sitting at the southern tip of Africa, and hoping that we begin to make some real progress.
Thank you, Bruce. I think I will leave the standards themselves to the standard setters. I've spent enough time setting standards. Myself and Pada, we were co-editors of the International Standard for Corporate Governance, the ISO 37000 standard. So we've done our hard work, hard labor with that. So we'll leave the standard set, the international standards to the standard setters. But what we have got in our midst here today is with Harry's governing council, people like the good and the great on Harry's governing council, like Paul Druckmann, Jane Diplock, people like that. And then in Heller's advisory committee, we have the standard setters such as the International Sustainability Standards Board, the GRI, the Global Reporting Initiative. So we really have all the bodies that are needed. Also the global organizations such as the International Federation of Accountants, the accounting bodies such as the AICPA. I mean, we've managed to, through Mervin's network, collaborate with all of these very influential international parties to bring this information together into this knowledge exchange. And then, of course, the advisory committee is overseeing the work that PEDA's doing in the technical committee. And the technical committee has got it's a 3-year playbook. So this is not an easy task. And you heard a little bit, Harry mentioned it, about its business transformation. PEDA spoke a little bit about having to involve all of the corporate roles, from board to stakeholder relations to operations, IT, data, technology. All of these roles have to be involved. So it's very broad, and it takes 3 years is our optimal time. Now, when we speak to organizations that have done it already, like ABN AMRO, Infosys, Unilever, they are saying, oh, we're being optimistic. This is a 5 to 7 year process. So that is what's waiting for organizations when they think about sustainability reporting, when they think about starting to address and to publish against these standards. You've got a 3-year journey ahead of you. We've optimized it to 3 years. Because we know that companies don't have the time or the resources right now to do this. So yes, it's a little bit like herding cats, because we have this program and we are trying to get the collaborative content into this program. We're not creating our own content. We populate this playbook with our collaboration partners, like Accounting for Sustainability and other partners, in terms of populating the content of this How-To Playbook. So yes, it is a little bit like coordinating this great big activity, but I'm having fun doing it with the right people. Thank you, Bruce.
Carolyn, if I could just ask you, I mean, it's taken, I don't know how many 100 years for accounting to get to where it is. And people are very critical, of course, of the latest IFRS standards. It's infernally complicated. It feels like we're starting at ESG almost at square one. And we want to do this you want to do it in 3 years, 5 to 7 years, possibly. This is a little bit like, I don't know, going to the beginning of a pandemic and saying, let's see if we can get vaccines within 6 months. No, it's impossible. But we've got to do, I suppose, the impossible in our current context.
Absolutely. We can't afford to wait. We're making public policies, laws, rules, regulations based on what information? Yes, it's scientific information, it's scientific basis. But what about the real information that the corporates, that the organizations are sitting on? So the world needs this information. As Mervyn was saying, 80% of the decision-making of these large and listed organizations around the world is based on these non-financial factors or sustainability information. Let me say it that way, because this is when you say ESG, people are saying, what about the economics of it? When people say sustainability reporting, they mean financial factors and non-financial factors. So yes, we need to move forward in this way. And now I've lost my train of thought because I looked at Hela. I remember Hela saying we can't have greenwashing anymore, or green wishing. So she was just giving me that beady eye. So I lost my train of thought.
That's perfectly all right. I can only imagine. Hela, as you've made Carolyn lose her train of thought, we've been up since very early this morning, of course, with the various sessions that we've been part of today. Just if the beady eye, please could you translate that into words?
In terms of greenwashing and green wishing, well, yes. What we're seeing at the moment is that, and it's for most, I don't even think it's because they want to, do what we call greenwashing, but because we don't really know how are we accounting for these different things, how are we putting it into disclosure, et cetera, et cetera. And perhaps we have some silo thinking. We are not seeing that integrated way of reporting where we would find if there was greenwashing. I'm not saying that there's none out there that kind of like want to say, hey, let's put up all the good stuff and forget about the bad stuff. But that's just nowadays. I mean, it's not, it will be found, right? We're living in a transparent world. And as I just heard at this Greenfin conference from the big asset managers, they're saying, either you report it and we use it, or we find the information somewhere else. So wouldn't it be better to do that? So greenwashing makes sure that you actually both report on the good, the bad, and if there's anything ugly, but also the wishing. We have this where we're saying, oh, let's put a good target out there. And then you have some, unfortunately, companies that might say, oh, well, that's not my problem. It's the next CEO or the CEO after that. And that's where I, in terms of the board of directors and others, say, you want to make sure that you hold people accountable. And you need to have the incentives in place for that as well. And again, there, you need to have something that you can measure. So what we are doing here is to give that playbook. It is to give that very road to where we need to go. And instead of companies need to go, left and right and not really finding out where it is, we're saying, here's the road you can travel. And here are probably some of the bumps that you will find in the road. Here's how to get around it, right? So we actually get to where we need to go as fast as possible, but not only one company at the time, which was I was trying to say before. We need all companies to do it because, one company, great, we can put an award out, but what's really important here is that we get all companies to do this. That's the way we as a society will succeed.
Thank you, Helle, very much. To everybody who's joined us today, and I see the numbers have risen to nearly 140, which is fabulous. We've got another 28 minutes or so to go before we do need to log off and send you to your evening activities. But we would really appreciate your questions. And also directed to the person you would like your question directed to, please. If you could use the Q&A function just beneath the pictures. Apologies. That's what happens when you live in a digital world and work with paper still. Sorry, trees. I will be better, I promise. And if your questions can come through on the Q&A function, that would be marvelous. Professor Mervyn King, we saw the great shortcomings in the ratings agencies in 2008 with AAA rated papers and all of that sort of stuff being sold as high quality investment grade material to pension funds all over the world. We've seen a movie before that's something of a horror movie. How do we ensure that ESG doesn't go down the same path of being perceived as a rubber stamping exercise?
Well, I can answer your question in one word: certainty. We need certainty in those standards of sustainability reporting. With respect to the raters and the rankers, they were rating ESG factors without a standard. Just think about that. So that they were there was a moving platform on which they were rating. And so the question is to ask the rater, what measurements were you using to rate Woodfield Limited listed on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange? What did you use? Now we're going to have standards. The question is, which standards? In which jurisdiction? Well, that's going to depend on the regulator in that jurisdiction. And that's where I think the ESG Exchange has got a huge role to play, is on content, is to point out what the content is and how you should, I call it mining that information. Pedro's got other language for it, but I, having chaired many companies, I know about mining information, getting that information out, getting it up to the board in a clear, concise, and understandable manner. And the critical thing is to understand, because a company has no mind of its own. It's an incapacitated artificial person. Bruce and I and Harry, the three of us are the directors. We are the mind and conscience of the company. And when something goes wrong, they must criticize Bruce, Harry, and Mervyn. The society and the company is always, by definition, innocent. If you've got a 1-year-old child and you and I are appointed as the child's guardian, you can hardly accuse the child of having done something wrong when you and I make a business judgment call error. So raters and rankers have got to be careful. But now they can rate and rank on standards, dependent, but they'll have to look at the jurisdiction, what the regulator in that jurisdiction says. And here again, I think the ESG exchange will be important because we will give the content to people and show them how to mine that information and how to report it, how to. As I've said in my talk this morning and this evening, the what is known, the who is known, it's management, it's how. Everybody's grappling around and how to. And it has, Bruce, literally taken hundreds of years for management to sit down in a corner office and draw the financial statements. And we've got a chartered accountant here, Heather. So I'm an aspiring accountant. I'm a corporate lawyer, but I understand accounting principles very well, as Heather knows. And you've got to have this deal of certain. There's a rigor in financial reporting. You've got to get the same rigor in sustainability reporting.
Fabulous. But is it possible to have exactly the same reporting standards? Because I think this is what we tried to achieve, whether it be in Brisbane, whether it be in Bangkok, in Beijing, in Berlin, I'm going across and I'm Birmingham, or Boston, or anywhere in between. Is it possible to have exactly the same standard applied in exactly the same way so that any potential investor anywhere in the world can quickly make an assessment on the integrity of the information that's presented to them?
The answer is no, because in every jurisdiction, you're going to have different circumstances and different needs and different crises. We've got many crises here in South Africa we've got to deal with. So Uganda's got crises that they're going to deal with. So I've been speaking to leaders, corporate leaders in several countries about the question of double materiality. Would they rather have a standard which sets a standard for inside out and outside in, or just outside in, such as SASB, and interoperability, something that's material in the sense would change your conclusion, your thinking, and add that in? And that's the area of so-called dynamic materiality. Now you've got to add something material. So this is, Bruce, even for the panelists, my colleagues on this webinar, we are aware of these differences. And we've got to wrap our heads around this to get this playbook out. And so we want to make it easier for people to report. But the end game of all this is that to have a baseline of ESG standards, and that's what I think is going to be achieved through the ISSB, a baseline of integrated reporting, and then have a baseline. FASB and IASB for years have been talking to get one standard on financial reporting. It is insane when you think years ago we had different standards in different countries until the IFRS was formed and you had all those 144 countries coming together. But to have two major standards that are still not the same, FASB, which is really controlled by statute, Harry, and other standards which are not controlled by statute. And you've got the IFRS standard, so that in financial reporting, I couldn't even answer your question as an affirmative. But the end game has to be that we have a comprehensive corporate reporting system. So whether you're reporting in Jakarta or Seoul or Johannesburg, there's comparability. I can compare your company with Hella's company.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. A question from Lee Swan, who once walked to the North Pole. I think that was about 10 or 11 years ago. She is the Emergent Consulting in South Africa. Does ESG Exchange approach or playbook accommodate organizations with global footprints, operations in multiple countries and multiple subsidiaries? Can you explain how this would work practically with the complexities in governance structures of such companies? Harry, you're nodding furiously. Let's go to you.
Yeah, I'm known to nod furiously when I agree with something. This is truly a global enterprise. I think if you look at the corporate governance structure of the ESG exchange itself, you will see that although we have been born in South Africa, it is actually a global organization. More importantly, it's an interdisciplinary organization. We have financial experts, we have sustainability experts, we've got labor experts, and so forth. And I think this conversation we just had with Mervyn about whether there's one standard or not, we see our job as to stimulate a convergence, and I think that's what we're trying to epitomize by our own structure, to provide a forum for companies of all sizes, of all nationalities, of all sectors to come together. So it's not just providing a how-to operational playbook, not just an educational organization, but actually a hands-on how to actually do your reporting, but we're also providing a forum for these kinds of conversations. And I would submit that that is really unique in the world market, and it's sorely needed, I think, as this conversation really illustrates.
It had to happen at some point. Some twit had to do it. Anthony Julies, Carolyn, would love to know from you, please. Would sustainability content for global standard setting not require a paradigm shift away from the Milton Friedman profit-focused philosophy to a societal and environmentally driven collectivist process? Some interesting choice of language there, but I'm curious as to what you think.
Very interesting question. And I think it's something that Larry Fink has been grappling with and being criticized for and commenting around. Does ESG mean that you need to be a socialistic organization or live in a socialistic world? And absolutely not, in terms of what Larry is saying, Larry Fink is saying, in terms of the approach to ESG. And we need to think about the environment, society, and governance are factors that have been well recognized now as having impacts on organizations, and organizations having impacts on them, which impact them in turn. So it is almost a circular argument. So yes, ESG, but also in the context of what Mervyn was speaking about in the Brundtland Commission's people, planet, prosperity. So we can't forget the economic factors. So absolutely, in an organization, organizations do need to pivot. There is a paradigm shift involved. So we are seeing the pivots from the primacy of the shareholder into more stakeholder inclusivity. And I know that this is Mervyn's pet hate, is saying stakeholder capitalism, because it's not stakeholder capitalism. We're not socialistic. This is stakeholder inclusivity. So there does need to be a pivot around a different way of thinking and looking at different imperatives in the organization. And that's why we have importantly considered all the roles in the organization. This has to be a whole organization approach, from the top, the board setting the mandate and recognizing the need for that pivot, all the way through to the decision-making throughout the organization, to the answers that are being provided to the stakeholders. So yes, I think there is a need for a pivot. It's been spoken about. It is not a socialistic or an economic model. And I think we're talking out of turn. This is Harry's domain. It's not an economic change. It is an organizational shift for sustainability.
Wonderful, thank you. I think, Pato, this one's for you from Arnold Smith, saying business schools have been around for 100 years. What role do you wish them to play to best prepare future business leaders and managers for leading on the ESG front?
Look, I think they've got a very significant, a huge impact contribution to make. And in fact, they're part of the advisory structure that we have within the construct of the ESG Exchange, a number of them already involved. If we think about, okay, let's try and just demystify ESG and sustainability for a moment. When you look at the frameworks, when you look at the standards, there's a lot of complexity, yes, but truthfully, it's just big and basic, organized, common sense. You know, about 12 months ago, I joined a company called Archer. 80-odd% of the Fortune 500s are customers. Incredibly on calls with these huge behemoth organizations, I haven't come across one yet that's effectively not at its wit's end in trying to understand this, because people are trying to make complexity out of reasons of self-interest in some parts. But when you think about it at a board level, what's a director of an organization expected really to be able to do? That is, number one, ask the big and basic questions. Know how to interrogate the answers. That's one of the things that we'll be delivering in our How-To Playbooks. But then when we look at, for example, chief sustainability officers, there are people today who carry that title, sustainability lead and so forth, who didn't carry that title 12 and 18 months ago. I know some who 18 months ago and 2 years ago were journalists, right? Lawyers, marketeers, people who organizationally, in fact, today have a situation where they are required to gather information. It's not rocket science, it's gathering information that has to go into different buckets and find a way of bringing all that information together such that it can be rendered in a decision useful format. But they've never done it. They don't have the organization experience and so forth. So there'd be a how-to aspect of that, joining them up with the CIOs of the organization, in particular the chief risk officers in organizations. So in large part, our intention here is to being agnostic to the standards and the frameworks, being friendly to business, provide a series of how-to playbooks within a construct, because we've worked out effectively these big and basic, what we call, we think called the ESG value stack, those 5 things you've got to do. And we've looked at that value stack through the lens of the corporate personas. What do you find? You see the dots that need to be joined. Organized common sense. That's what we'll be doing through the production of the how-to playbooks. So don't get afraid when you hear us use terms like double materiality and dynamic materiality. And yes, certain topics in the E are incredibly complex, carbon emissions, carbon accounting, and so forth. But let the specialists in those areas worry about that and get the right information. From a corporate reporting perspective, moving that sustainability dial in the corporate, it's about knowing what you need to do in pulling information together, clarifying it, cleansing it, structuring it, bringing it together such that apples are with apples, not with coconuts. And the decision makers then are able to steer the business, because that's the purpose of a board. Its job is to steer the organization. The etymology of the word governance is to steer. Management will trim the sails, everybody else will keep the ship tight. That's so basically there's an orchestration role effectively is what we're about here in the ESG Exchange.
I love your description of ESG being common sense, but my late grandfather would always say there's nothing common about common sense, my boy, which is why we have to set global standards. Hella, I don't know if you take offense to Elon Musk's perspective on ESG. What did he call it? Did he call it junk? Did he call it trash? Did he call it rubbish? He was very disrespectful. He called it a scam. That was the word I was looking for. He called it a scam, and I wonder if looking at recent history and the sorts of people who are busy putting themselves out into the public domain as so-called experts in this field on the platforms as Peter described, as if he may have a point, which then emphasizes the need for the standards, I suppose.
Bruce, yes, we have a lot of people at the moment that are, criticizing, you can say, the term and saying, well, it actually comes back to what we talked about before with greenwashing and greenwishing. And yes, you're totally right. If we have a clear path, if we know where we're going, if we know how to compare, well, there is no more guesswork, right? And therefore, the good people like him that says, now I'm not in that rating or ranking anymore, so therefore it's a scam, will be, well, you're not in that rating or ranking because of, he compared perhaps to all of the companies instead of comparing to the different types of industries. So all of that is something we need to have a good look at it. Make sure, again, we can compare all of these different, we can show the value creation. This is about showing the value creation. This is about the transition. This is about both the E, environment, the S, social, and the G, the governance. And it's about doing it in a transparent way so that we all know and we can all make informed decisions. Because one of the problems at the moment is that we're making decisions all the time, but is it really an informed decision if I don't know if I can trust the information in front of me, and where I can listen to all of those fantastic voices that's very good at getting people to go either to one side or the other. We want people to actually go together to the future that we want.
That's a nice way to round it up, Hella. Thank you. I'm going to give the other panelists just a moment just to consolidate their thoughts, if you like, as we wrap up, just as we head towards 7 o'clock. Harry, in the United States, a thought or two or six?
Yeah, I mean, we can talk about Mr. Musk all we want. I think the issue is, and I'm speaking now as an economist, the market is overwhelming him. Capital markets are speaking. And that's a force to be reckoned with. We can talk about it in terms of Mr. Musk or Mr. Friedman, but companies are going to be judged. Boards are going to be judged not only by their financial performance, but by their performance on ESG. That cat is out of the bag. And the problem is that many companies don't understand how to mitigate that risk. They don't even understand, in some sense, what that risk is. And it seems to me that this is the value that we're trying to bring to the marketplace, is have them make, as Hella said, informed decisions that will serve them best. Because if they're not informed and they make poor decisions, the market will speak volumes.
Thank you very much, Harry. Peder, let's get a thought from you, and then we'll let you go for your evening. And a nice long evening it will be in either as well.
Look, I describe ESG as old risk management wine in a new bottle, and it's called an ESG bottle, right? And in the context of common sense, it is fairly common, in fact. You look at its distribution, of course, you're going to have the Elon Musks and the others, the protagonists and the antagonists. But in the middle, you've got the people who, by and large, tend to want to do the right thing. And I stress, when you look at the standards and the frameworks, they are organized common sense. There is no rocket science in any of the particular requests for accounting metrics here or narrative disclosures there. So I think one of the things that's going to make this thing a success is because people actually, in their private lives and their business lives, they actually want to do the right thing. And as someone asked me before, there's a maxim I have, which is, when in doubt, always do the right thing. And someone said, well, how do you know what the right thing is? Quite often you don't. The important thing is to try and find that right thing. That's the thing of steering and governorship and stewardship and so forth. And that's what we're here, not as a panacea or a silver bullet. We're just here to help make a contribution, do the right thing in the context of being sustainable over the longer.
Very philosophical, Peder. Thank you very much indeed. Carolyn, a final word from you.
Final word from me. I think my call to action this morning stands, and that's saying we can't wait. We need to do this now. This is not a compliance tick box exercise where it's one role in an organization and we can just, slap another layer of reporting on top of existing data. It doesn't exist, as Peder was starting to explain. And we need an organization-wide approach to this. So it's going to take a while. And the cost of capital is rising as capital providers are looking for this sustainability information. And if you want to get the benefits and reap the benefits of having been first to market, of having this information available for your capital providers like investors and banks, then you need to start now. It's an optimal process is 3 years. The big organizations that are well matured in this have taken a lot longer. So really we need to start now. So I would say join us. The doors open in September with our first cohort through module 1. So we will keep everyone posted in our go live. Thanks.
Wonderful. And final word, if we can, Mervyn King. It is, your life's work, if you like. Where would you like to see us go with ESG and the ESG?
Well, first of all, I think that I said in 2016, as I said this morning, which caused much debate, that accountants can save the planet. I said it because of their professional training, that they are the guardians of the business information inside the company. And we know that the doctrine of the primacy of the shareholder has failed. That's clear. And no one can run a company today on the basis of making sure that the share price increases and your dividend increases and therefore you're successful. You're not going to be measured that way. You're going to be measured by the value you're creating for society. And we need that to create that value for society if we're going to save planet Earth, because we're not going to reach those sustainable development goals if we don't have reporting on these factors. The more informative reporting is, the more transparent is your duty of accountability. And we have to be accountable as directors of companies. We are the conscience of companies. And if we can, if you think you could do it just by looking at the financial aspects, ignoring all the other aspects which make up now 80% of the market cap of companies, well, then I think you're a delinquent director myself. And so you have to have this all-embracing mindset about value creation or preservation or erosion, then deal with the erosion. So value creation today is the name of the game. And there is no turning back, because the capital markets have spoken. If you and I, Bruce, are directors of a company and we decide to issue a bond with a certain coupon that goes out to the capital markets, they'll do a financial due diligence, of course, but they also do an ESG due diligence today. And I'm very happy to say that that due diligence is done on the basis of principles set out in King 4, which were followed in 37,000. Are you creating value in a sustainable manner? It's no good creating value if it's not sustainable. And all the other outcomes that which we set out in King 4. So that ESG due diligence is done as well. And the fact is that ESG funds have increased about 80% of the money being held by asset owners and asset managers today, compared to 20% just focused on companies that are still operating on the basis of the primacy of the shareholder. So Harry is right. We don't have to answer your question. The markets have answered your question.
Wonderful. What a way to wrap up. Thank you so much, Mervyn King, very much indeed. Also to Harry Broadman, thank you very much indeed. Carolyn Chalmers, thank you. Peter Duffy, thank you. And Hellebank Jorgensen, thank you very much indeed. And to all of you who've joined us from across the globe for this critical session on ESG. To quote Greta Thunberg, blah, 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 blah. The time is over for that. The time now for action. And actions speak a lot louder than words. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.